Hey, IB History Scholars, it's Mr. Newcomb, and in this particular session, I want to focus on topic number 12 here, which is called the Great Depression and the Americas. I'm going to break it up into three parts. Part one, focusing on the causes and President Herbert Hoover and his approach. Part two, focus on President Franklin D. Roosevelt and his approach to the Great Depression. And then in part three, take a look at Canada and their approach to the Great Depression. So again, in part one, take a look at causes and causes of the Great Depression and Herbert Hoover. And so to start with that, give a little overview here. During the 1920s, there were many weaknesses in the economy that were beginning to be ignored by politicians and the economists. After all, it was the Roaring Twenties. It looked like everything was moving in the right direction, but underneath the surface, you could see that there were cracks happening in a variety of sectors and in people's ability to sustain the Roaring Twenties. The election of FDR in 1932 is definitely going to mark an end to 12 years of Republican rule here, and so the United States is going to embark in a new direction. The New Deal will attempt to preserve capitalism by balancing the needs of the capitalist class with the demands of the working class. And so basically trying to find a way to overhaul the system without actually overthrowing it and moving it into a really different direction. The New Deal will represent the federal government's expansion and implementation of its authority of tax, borrow, and spend in order to find solutions for the economy. Realistically, what all that means is the federal government will become very active here. And FDR and the New Deal took great strides in ending the Depression, relief and reform, but it was not until World War II that the United States recovered from it. So one would say FDR and his measures did find a way to get that relief and reform to the system. So perhaps maybe we got some safety nets put in place there, but ultimately the full recovery begins with World War II. All right, so if we look at the causes of the Great Depression, we do have to put under the microscope a number of factors here, one of them being the policies and the philosophy of the conservative Republican administration. They were for less regulation in the economy, definitely supporting the idea of laissez-faire. And when we look at the old saying, less government in business and more business in government, that kind of sums up their views there. Unequal distribution of wealth here, we can definitely see through some of the tax policies that were being implemented in the 1920s. The policies tended to benefit corporations and wealthy Americans. And the thought was you give the tax cuts to those groups and you can have a little trickle down, but not a lot of it is trickling to the bottom, and so that will have a problem, especially leading to the next one here, under consumption. You don't have a steady income stream coming in, or not a lot. You can't consume. You lose your purchasing power. The rise of protectionism, the passage of the Hawley-Smoot tariff, will be one of the largest or the highest tariffs that we will have at that time, and that really hurt our exporting ability here. Inadequate capital investment, just basically, corporations are getting tax cuts, but they're not investing it completely into the redevelopment of their corporations as well. And that could play a part in the technology too. Whether or not they are modernizing their plants or the technology is replacing workers, and that could therefore lead to unemployment. So in some ways, you look at technology can be that double-edged sword here. The fragility of the banking system here We do have a Federal Reserve System, but it lacks a punch, an enforcing ability to it. So basically, banks are still engaging in risky financial activities, giving out lots of loans, maybe to loans to individuals or to organizations, companies that probably shouldn't be getting them. They're not keeping enough cash on hand, so if a run on the bank happens, they can meet it. Uh, the banking system is pretty fragile and just needs one or two big events to happen to cause it to completely collapse. And then finally, borrowing on the margin here, the stock market speculation. Reality is not that many Americans in the 1920s were engaging in the stock market, but those that did were engaging in some risk behavior. Borrowing on the margin just simply meant you put 10% down and covered the other 90% with a loan. All that works well when the economy or the market is in a bullish attitude where it's rising, but if it goes down into hibernation or into a bear market, uh, you're going to have to pay the margin and you just won't have the cash to do that. And then you had a lot of inside trading and investment pools that are also affecting the stock market as well. So all those together, perfect storm for causing the Great Depression. Now, when we look at the extent of the collapse here, it's not just going to be here in the United States, but it's going to be worldwide. And the effects are really going to be hit heavy, hard on the highly industrialized countries like the United States, Germany, and Great Britain, which then will have a ripple effect on other countries because we need access to the markets or to the resources and such. So when we look at some of the major effects and symptoms of this crisis, the gross national product is cut in half, and that's basically the nation's ability to bring in the money. It's cut in half. It's going to have a huge effect. Per capita disposable income fell. Purchasing power goes away. Farm income declined and farm foreclosures increase. So the farming woes of the 20s continue into the 1930s. And of course, the protectionism, that's not going to help. Unemployment increases. By 1933, it's almost 25% there. New investments decline because stock market is unstable and investments aren't occurring. Exports fell again because of the Hawley-Smoot tariff. Building construction slowed down. Again, all of this is all related to each other when it comes to reinvestment into one's economy or, into one's business. If that money isn't there, well, construction is going to go down. If people don't have the ability to purchase, because their purchasing power has gone down, their wages have been decreased, people aren't buying homes. So construction is going to definitely go down. Bank failures increase. 1700 in 1933. When those banks close, people lose money. And throughout the United States, you could find examples of hunger, homelessness, and mental depression here. Now, our president at the time, Herbert Hoover, he was elected in 1928, and there was a lot of optimism with him, based on his previous record involved in public service in the Wilson, Harding, and Coolidge administration. So he could be the one for the job, but there's going to be a number of things that's going to contribute to his undoing here. Hoover preached about the virtues of localism, volunteerism, and rugged individualism. Rugged individualism is all about you just pulling up your boots, go out there and make your own situation here, depend on yourself to get you through the good and tough times here. Volunteerism, when you start falling on hard times, volunteer measures as opposed to mandatory measures is what he's looking for here. And localism, look at your local government first for any type of assistance. Hoover believed that as president, direct federal assistance should not occur here. Again, it's more local, state, and even charitable relief measures should happen. Believe that the market will right itself, the old business cycle, the ups and the downs. The ups is the boom, the down is the bust, and it will just simply right itself. Government intervention would undermine the system and the American character. The American character about self-made, through hard work, you shall get rewarded. All that would be undercut if we did direct federal assistance. And the Depression was an overseas phenomenon. And so he deflected the blame and put it on Europe, and without taking a little bit of ownership, responsibility that maybe the United States contributed to some of this as well. All that's going to begin to work against him. So when we look at his attempts to fix the system, it's not that he didn't make any attempts. He did, but one could make the claim that it didn't go far enough, and he started responding to some of the problems too late. Hoover's attempt to right the economy, first he looked at the agriculture, and he came up with the Agricultural Marketing Act of 1929, and that really set up a commission to look at buying up farm surplus, get farmers not to produce as much crops, take a look at their livestock and maybe reduce their livestock, all that stuff, but also give some subsidies to them as well. And so that was his attempt to address the farm situation. He proposed an international moratorium on the war reparations and debts in 1931. Many countries by 1931 started to repudiate their war debt or simply scale back on their payments. The establishment of the Reconstruction Finance Corporation in 1932, that was probably his best measure. Loans were to be given to businesses, farms, local and state governments, try to find ways to keep their businesses afloat, farms not being foreclosed on. FDR is actually going to build on this one. Try to maintain a balanced budget by raising taxes. Once he started going in that direction, he lost some of his conservative Republican allies in Congress. Problems for Herbert Hoover was that his name became associated with the misery, and so the visible reminders out there usually reflected his name. Shanty towns became known as Hoovervilles. Blankets that were newspapers became known as Hoover blankets, and so forth. And so his name started to represent disdain. The Bonus Army disaster, where World War I veterans marched on Washington, D.C., demanded their bonus that was promised to them, but that bonus wasn't going to be paid until 1945. They wanted it early. The U.S. House of Representatives in 1932 had approved it. However, the U.S. Senate did not. The Hoover administration wanted the Bonus Army to go back home. They refused. He had sent in the troops to remove them, and that just turned into a disaster for him. The Farm Holidays Association was created by farmers. This was an idea that farmers collectively would find ways to find relief for their situation. They would just simply stop farming, create a farm holiday on that particular day or that particular week, and sometimes they engage in extreme measures killing off their livestock, destroying their crops, all with an effort to try to find relief, reduce that supply so that could increase the price of their products here. At the end of the day, many of Hoover's measures fell short. The falling farm prices continued. The high protective tariffs hurt our ability to trade. The wages were going down, and millions of unemployed by 1932 and 33 was there. Again, 25%. Foreclosures of businesses and farms increased, and failing banks ultimately spelt the end of Herbert Hoover's administration, and he will not get reelected in 1932. And so the next session will be on part 2, which would be about FDR and his approach to the Great Depression.